Hey guys, it's Turnrow here, and today I'll be continuing on with my AI scripting tutorial, and today we are going to look at a different way of how we can write our own AI scripts, which is a method that I preferably use when writing my own AI scripts for my own maps, which is where we are programming or writing the actual code of our AI using Jazz code. Now, before we get into that sort of part, it is probably best for me to explain or give you a brief introduction to what Jazz code is. So, Jazz code is essentially a library extension of a programming language called C++, which was developed by the programmers at Blizzard to write and create their RTS games, such as Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2. So in other words, Jazz code is the actual programming used to create the game. Now, there are some people who, when it comes to triggers, for example, they like writing their triggers using actual Jazz code, which this is an example of what Jazz code can look like. And as a result, it gives a lot of freedom and choice and ability to do whatever you want in Warcraft 3. Now, the good news is we're not concentrating on Jazz code in triggering, since there is a lot to learn. We are only concentrating on a very, very small aspect of Jazz code, which is where we are using it to write our own AI scripts. Now, the idea of writing code may sound daunting to a lot of people, especially if you've had very little experience in coding before. However, as we'll learn throughout this tutorial video, writing AI scripts in Jazz is actually pretty straightforward and easy to learn. Now, in the last tutorial video, we went through how to make our own AI scripts using the Warcraft 3 world editor, where we learnt things such as setting the AI to build or train units and sending attack waves. Now the question lies, why would we want to write our own AI scripts as opposed to creating them through the AI editor? And there's two main reasons for that. The first one being that when you're writing your own AI scripts, you have the freedom to do whatever you want. You can program your AI to do things that are not possible through this AI editor, such as if you want to make super smart AI that acts very close to how a player would act in certain situations. There are numerous occasions on myself where I have written or used AI scripts and used it in certain situations that you cannot do using the AI editor. For example, when it comes to sending attack waves, say for example you want your AI script to run because you want them to train units to defend their base and to collect resources, but you don't want them to send any attacks to the player until they've reached a certain point in the game. There's no way of doing this using the AI editor. Another limitation that I've come across plenty of times is when it comes to setting the amount of seconds between each attack wave, for example. And you may want these attack waves, how long they wait, to be dynamic. So for example, you want the AI to increase the number of attack waves if the player is playing on a harder difficulty, or send less attack waves if they're playing on an easier difficulty. Again, you can't do this with the AI editor. So now that I've explained Jazz code and some of the advantages that it has over using the AI editor, we are now ready to actually look at the actual code itself and how we can write our own AI scripts. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need a program in order to write our own AI code. Now, if you really want to, you can open your AI scripts in Notepad and you will be able to alter your code this way. However, my recommendation is to use a program called Warcraft, which I will provide a link to download and install in the description below. But what it is it is a program that allows you to easily write Jazz code. And as we compare what the code looks like in Warcraft, as opposed to just opening up in Notepad, you can see that the code in Warcraft is much more visibly readable because it makes use of colors to color in the actual code and the background, which is a lot harder to do in Notepad where it is just plain black and white. So, without further ado, this is a basic AI script that is used for one of the missions in the Warcraft 3 campaigns, and I will go through line by line exactly what it's doing. So first of all, you've got code with hashes at the front, like main or wave 1, JavaScript demo, etc. And in programming, these are called comments. Now, when the AI script runs, these lines don't do anything, but they are there because when it comes to writing code, you may want to, as a programmer, explain what the code actually does. For example, we could rename this main to explain more what this particular function does. So this will call when the AI script runs for the first time. You can literally put whatever comments you want to explain to other people who read it what exactly it's trying to do. Now, starting at the top, we've got a section called globals. And what this does is it allows us to define our own variables we want to use within the AI script. Now, for those who are unfamiliar what a variable is, if you have watched my previous tutorial videos, you will know that in the AI editor, for example, when we want to specify a unit that's been created, we can create a variable, call it paladin, and set it as a unit variable type. And then we go into actions and we go set variable, set paladin equal to, and we select a paladin, for example. And then we can specify that paladin throughout our triggers. So for example, set the mana of paladin, or better, paladin to 100. The same basis applies to what we're doing here. So first of all, we are setting a player variable called player2. Now what this is it essentially is the player slot that you want to use for the AI script. So what this AI script does is it sends attack waves to a player, but you're able to specify which player the AI attacks. So in this example, if we go back into the editor, you will notice when you go to player properties is that there are player slots from 1 to 12. So in the AI script where it has a 2, for example, it means that the AI will attack player 2, which is blue. If we wanted to change it, for example, to player 4, it would mean that the AI will attack player 4, for example, etc. So, just as we can set variables for units, there is one used to set for a unit here, for Varimathras, the Dreadlord. Now, what this is is for every single unit, item, tree, whatever that exists within the game that is an actual object, it has a 4-digit code which is used to identify that unit, item, tree, etc. within the code while you're coding in Jazz. So I'll explain briefly more about what this means. So, for example, when we're using AI scripting and we want to say we want the AI to build a peasant. Now, the AI script, you can't just say peasant because it doesn't know what a peasant is. Computers don't speak English. So instead, it works by reading a 4-digit code, which we can see what it is by going into the object editor and pressing Ctrl-D on the keyboard. And you'll notice that there is a bunch of 4 letters that appear before the peasant, which is HPEA. This is the actual code of the peasant itself. So if we go into here, we could say, for example, go constant integer peasant custom equals HPEA. Now, skipping ahead a bit, you will notice that there are some English words used throughout this script, such as acolyte, abomination, slaughterhouse, etc. Within Warcraft 3, there are predefined variables that you can use for some common units so that you don't have to remember their 4-digit code as you're writing these scripts. And you can find out what they are by when you're installing Jazzcraft on your computer, there will be a file you can open called common.ai. And when you open it, if we scroll down a bit, you will actually see all the predefined variables for different units, buildings, upgrades, heroes, etc. that you can use. So you can use Archmage, Paladin, Mountain King, etc. Now that we have defined our globals, for example, we can actually go through this function called main, which, for those of you who don't know what a function is, it's essentially a container of a bit of code that you want to run. Now, main is called whenever the AI script runs for the first time. So it is within this function that you will actually order the AI to build units and send attack waves. So starting from the very beginning, we've got a few calls here, and some of them are essential while others are not. So call campaign AI is an essential method, and this is used for specifying what sort of food production building this AI will be relying on for their food supply. So for example, because we are writing an AI script for an undead faction, we specify that we want their food production building to be a ziggurat. If it's a night elf faction, for example, we would rename this to Moon Well. And as you'll see, as you're writing the code in Jazzcraft, if the function or if the variable that we're writing turns to gray as we're writing it, we can easily see that it is a predefined variable. Whereas if it remains white, it is not, and we have to define the variable ourselves within this globals part. So if we rewrite ziggurat 1, just undo here. You can press Ctrl Z to undo the code you write, by the way, which is pretty standard in a lot of programs. Okay, so this second call here, set replacements. Say for example, you have an AI team that has some units on the ground. So for example, if we have a base somewhere where we place the undead, and we set a couple of ghouls, and we place down an abomination. Now, what this means is that this call allows us to say to the AI, if the unit dies, how many times that unit will actually be replaced. So for example, when this abomination dies, it means that the AI will retrain that abomination at a slaughterhouse. And you'll notice that there are 3 numbers here. And what these represent are the different difficulties in Warcraft 3. So the first number is for easy difficulty, the second number is for normal difficulty, and the third number is for hard difficulty. So what this means is for easy and normal difficulty, the AI will only replace this abomination once, and then for hard difficulty, the AI will replace the abomination 3 times. And you can set this to whatever number you want. This next call, set slow chopping. This is where you want the AI to only collect 1 gold from a gold mine at a time, or only cut down 1 lumber from a tree at a time, so that the AI doesn't run out of resources, which is the same feature that is available in the AI editor where we can set slow harvesting, for example. And then the next call, set peons repair, is also another similar feature that is in the AI editor where we can specify if the AI repairs their buildings if they're under attack or if they're damaged. So these 2 calls you don't have to specify for an AI script, since if you do not call them, these will be true by default. So we can get rid of these and it will do the exact same thing as this. But if you want them to be false, for example, so there's no slow chopping or buildings aren't repaired, then you will need to specify them and type in false, for example. So it only accepts a true or a false value. Now this next section here is essentially we're telling the AI to build units and buildings, which is, if we go into the AI editor, which is essentially the same as this part right here, where we're ordering the AI to build a peon. Within the Jazz code, it's achieved in this line, where the 3 numbers representing easy difficulty, normal difficulty, and hard difficulty. So as we can see in this particular AI, for example, we've specified a 0 for easy and normal difficulty, meaning that the AI doesn't bother to rebuild their buildings if they're destroyed, but they do on hard difficulty. And you will see the usual undead buildings such as the necropolis, the crypt, graveyard, altar, etc. This next section here is where we specify units that are going to defend the base, which is essentially different from this AI scripting here for the AI editor, where we simply say build this unit, build this structure, build this unit. What this actually does is the unit that is trained using Campaign Defender X actually behaves differently compared to a normal unit that is trained this way, because what this particular unit will do is it will actually go and patrol around the town hall of the AI and then defends the base when it's under attack. Whereas opposed to this call, for example, where it just builds a unit, it just builds a unit and it will only attack the player if they get within sight range of that unit. So if you want the AI to defend themselves, you make use of these calls. The next call, where we go wait for signal. Now this is not essential to use, but what it does is the AI will start running from here. It will set the different options we want the AI to do. It will train units and build structures and set defending units, and then the AI script will simply stop here and wait for a signal within the triggers of the game. And in Warcraft 3 World Editor, you can send this signal for the AI to continue running by going into triggers and going into actions and go send AI command. And you would send player 4 purple the AI command 0, 0. Now, what numbers you use, whether 0 or 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter what numbers you use. All the AI is waiting for is just a command of any kind, and then the AI will start running or continue to run. And this is useful, for example, where we want the AI to run so that they train units and build structures, but we don't want them to send any attacks to the player yet. So this is a way you can achieve that by making use of this wait for signal call. Now this next part here is where we simply send the attack waves. So in the AI editor, it's essentially we have an AI group and we specify what units and how many, and then send the actual attack. This is all done through this small block of code. So the very first thing you need to do is you need to call init assault group. This is telling the AI that you are preparing the AI to send an attack at a player. So you have to use this every time you want to send an attack wave. And then you specify by unit type a campaign attacker X, where you simply say the unit you want to send be part of the attack wave, which in this case is abomination. And you have the easy, normal, hard to specify how many abominations within this particular attack wave. And you can do this for as many different unit types you want, such as we are making use of the Verimathris unit that we've specified in the globals part. So, and then the last part is where we actually send the attack wave, suicide on player X. And we specify how many seconds it waits. So this can either be a number, so for example 60 seconds, 30 seconds, or in this second attack wave, it can be M5, M3. Now what M5 and M3 are they are also predefined variables within the common AI script. And it is essentially used to make it easier to say, for example, I want the AI to wait 3 minutes before sending the attack wave. So we make use of M3. Or I want the AI to wait 5 minutes before sending the attack wave, in which we say M5. So there's essentially a predefined variable for every single minute from 1 minute to 15 minutes that you can make use of. So we can say M15, we can say M12, we can go M3, M2. You will notice if the variable exists by typing it and it doesn't turn gray. So, and you'll see the next sort of bits of code is where we are also sending additional attack waves at the player. And one thing I actually forgot to mention earlier is that this suicide on player X call relies on the fourth number or part of the call to be the actual player we want to send the attack wave to, which user is actually the predefined variable that we've specified in the globals part. Now, if we really wanted to, we could skip using this global variable and just say player 2 or player x2 or player x1 for the player slot 1, which is red, for example, by going back into the player properties. The player slot 1 is red, player slot 2 is blue, etc. The reason why it is easy to set it as a variable is so if we do a change within the actual map where we change the actual player slot of the actual player that's being attacked. So for example, we want this AI to attack the playing player, which is red, and then all of a sudden we change the actual player slot to blue. The AI will not attack the correct player, and it means you'll have to update the code and make this change with every single time you reference the player. However, if we set it as a variable and set it in one place, it means that if the player slot is changed, we only have to change it once as opposed to changing it multiple times throughout the code. So, continuing on, you've got these additional calls, set, build, upgrade, X. And this essentially tells the AI to research an upgrade, which again has the different, the level of the upgrade for easy, normal, and hard, which is exactly the same thing by going into building and going add property, build specific upgrade. Now this last bit here is what is called a loop, where what the game will do when it reads this code is it will start here, it will call this attack wave, it will call the second attack wave, and it will call all the attack waves that are within the loop, and then it gets to the end and it goes back to the beginning of the loop and then runs the AI code again. So what this will do is it will run this bit of code inevitably, which means it will run forever, which is also something that is a bit tricky to achieve when this AI editor, where it gets to the very last AI wave and you want the AI to start again and send it attack waves all over again. This is easier to achieve in Jazz code, where we can specify a loop and we can put in all the different attack waves that we want within the in the code, and then it will forever run. One thing you will need to know when writing your AI scripts is that, and this applies to coding in general, is that it is very easy to make a mistake. Whereas when you're writing your AI scripts in Jazzcraft, how it will notify you if there is something that seems out of place by color coordinating the code, it is still somewhat easy to make an actual mistake within the code. And it can be easily missed. And debugging your code, which is another word of saying proofreading your code to make sure it's right,
is something that you will have to do when writing your own code. So for example, we put in a random S here. Now, if we import this AI script as it is now into our actual map, going into the import manager, when we load the AI script to run, if there is a bug in the AI script won't run. And so one technique you can use to help proofread your code and make sure that it works fine is by using a program called Jazz Demo. Will also be within the downloads in the description of the video below. But essentially what it does is it goes through your entire AI script and it checks each line to make sure that there's no mistakes within the actual code. So if we go to browse and we select on the AI script that we want to check, which is this one here, if we click on the check button, it will come up with what errors there were here. So it says here, hey, on line 39, there was this random S which doesn't belong. So it tells you what line there is an error on, and it will give an indication on what exactly the error is. So if we remove this S and save again, and now we rerun the program to check the AI script, success, no syntax errors found. So in short, we've achieved writing our AI scripts using two different methods. We have the AI editor, which we went through in our first tutorial video, and then in the second video, we've concentrated on writing our own AI scripts using Jazz code. And that pretty much concludes this tutorial video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like this video, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. But until next time guys, I'll see you later. Bye.